Thank you all for checking out Crime Culture. Today's story is one that captivated viewers across the country. A disappearance of two boys late at night, taken right out from under their mother's watch while stopped at a stoplight in Union, South Carolina. The search would go on for 9 days before investigators would learn the true fate of what happened to these boys, and it was more horrific and unsettling than anyone could have imagined. This is the heartbreaking true story of Michael and Alexander Smith. Today's story involves talks of sexual abuse, harm to minors, and suicide. And with that, viewer discretion is advised. If you are struggling with your mental health, know that you are not alone and resources are available that can help. I've included a list of some of those resources in today's video description. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the morbid and mysterious, go ahead and fist bump that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on all post notifications. It truly helps my channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you haunting stories just like the one I am promising you today. All right, turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself as we dive into today's story. Union, South Carolina, a small town of just under 10,000 people. A quiet little town where families know one another, one that has a rich Revolutionary and Civil War history filled with museums and battle sites. But on the fall night of October 1994, this little town of Union would become known for more than just its historical significance. The date is October 25th, 1994. Just after 9 p.m., Susan Smith and her two children are headed to a friend's house to hang out for a while and ultimately stay the night. The streets of Union are quiet. Susan's burgundy Mazda Protege is one of the only cars on the road. Inside, 23-year-old Susan Smith is at the wheel, getting tired as the day drags on. Susan has to be at work early the next morning at Conso Products Plant, a textile manufacturing company in Union, so she is rushing to get to her friend's house to call it a night. In the back seat, strapped into car seats, are her two sons, Michael, who is 3 years old, and Alexander, who is only 14 months. Susan pulls up to a stoplight near John D. Long Lake at the Carlisle intersection in Union. The water is calm tonight, reflecting the moon above. She waits for the light to turn green before taking her foot off the brake and beginning to accelerate, but it was already too late. Before the night was over, this stoplight at this intersection would become the center of a nationwide search and investigation. At 9:42 p.m., a frantic call comes into Union County 911. Susan reports that her car has been hijacked at gunpoint by an African-American man at an intersection near John D. Long Lake. She tells dispatchers he forced her out of the vehicle and drove away, with her children still inside, screaming and crying for their mother. At this point, Susan is understandably hysterical. The 911 dispatcher is having trouble understanding her, delaying the precious first few minutes that are so crucial in an investigation. "Ma'am, calm down. What's your location?" the dispatcher asks over and over again as Susan just continues to respond. "He just drove away. He has my babies. Please, you have to find them." Finally, the dispatcher was able to obtain the location of the carjacking, and within minutes, officers were dispatched and police cruisers flooded the area, flashing blue lights reflecting off the nearby lake as investigators search for any evidence that can assist them in their search. Officers set up roadblocks, essentially shutting down the streets leaving Union, searching desperately for Susan's burgundy Mazda. The town is awake now. Word spreads like wildfire. Two little boys are missing. The police department and citizens in this town spring into action to bring Michael and Alexander back home. By midnight, the search is fully underway. Helicopters scan the dark roads, bloodhounds arrive to assist in tracking the scent, hundreds of volunteers show up with flashlights, forming human chains across fields and back roads. Everyone is looking for Michael and Alex. Susan is escorted to the police station. She sits in a small room under fluorescent light. Her hands shake as she clutches tissues. She repeats the same story. A man approached her at a red light, gun in hand, forced her out, and sped off. At the time, Susan, still in shock, was unable to provide a substantial amount of detail to the police. She gave a vague description of the man that allowed police to generate a sketch, but outside of this sketch, there was very limited evidence pointing to where her sons could be. The road was dark, everything happened so quickly, her kids were screaming. The man was yelling at her to get out of the car, Susan pleaded. Then they were gone. This early on into an investigation, every second counts. The first 48 hours in any investigation is described as the golden window. The chance of finding evidence, locating suspects, and obtaining details on crimes significantly drop once this window closes. So, investigators are throwing all their resources at this case to try to bring these boys back and find something that will point them to the carjacker. Meanwhile, the children's father, David Smith, rushes to the station, his face pale, eyes wide, voice breaking. He pleads with police to please bring his boys back. Visibly distraught, police work to console David before pulling him into a room to speak to him. The nation begins to take notice. Within 24 hours, news crews are broadcasting from Union. The pictures of Michael and Alexander, along with this harrowing story, are displayed on news networks across the country. This story of a carjacking victim and mother pleading for the safe return of her sons grips the nation. Susan Smith appears on live television, her voice shaking as she begs the abductor to bring them home. Days pass, leads run cold. The investigation within these crucial first 48 hours turns up nothing. No suspicious man, no stolen car, no sign of Michael and Alex. As investigators continue to search for answers, they re-interview David and Susan, seeing if there is anything that they're missing. They ask Susan about her marriage, her relationships, her struggles, and Susan, under pressure, begins to reveal cracks in her perfect image. To onlookers, Susan and David had a happy marriage and a happy life here in the slow town of Union. They both had consistent employment, Susan working at the textile manufacturing plant and David working as a long-haul truck driver. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, their household appearing to be one filled with love. But under this pressure, Susan begins to reveal things not yet heard by investigators. She admits to a long history of infidelity and failed relationships, to a troubled marriage, to a deep depression fueled by tragedies she experienced as a child. Known to no one except Susan's inner circle, she had a very troubling and traumatic childhood. When Susan was only 6 years old, her father would tragically take his own life, leading her mother to raise her by herself until she ultimately remarried years following her husband's death. This remarriage, though, would only add to Susan's childhood trauma. By the age of 15, Susan's new stepfather began abusing her. Abuse that would continue into adulthood and follow her into her future relationships. Susan, throughout her teenage years, would make 2 attempts to take her life. It wasn't until years later that these horrific experiences were finally brought to light by investigators. This discovery would allow this case to finally start gaining some traction. While speaking with Susan, investigators discover something chilling. Susan had recently been rejected by a man she was romantically involved with, a man named Tom Findley, a local Union resident, and the owner of the manufacturing plant where Susan worked. Tom had expressed to Susan he was not looking for a serious relationship, and certainly not one with a married woman who had children. It is with this statement that investigators believe a motive surfaced. By November 3rd, 9 days after the disappearance, detectives sit across from Susan in the interrogation room, staring in silence. The room grows heavy. Finally, Susan breaks. "They're in the lake. I let the car roll into the lake." At 4 a.m. on a brisk November 4th morning, 10 days after the initial disappearance of the Smith boys, divers enter John D. Long Lake. The cold water swallows them whole as they dive down to investigate Susan's claims. Moments later, they find it, the burgundy Mazda Protege, submerged in 18 feet of water. Divers swim up to the window to investigate, wiping away the algae that has already started to envelop the exterior of the car, and that's when they spot them. Inside, still strapped into their car seats, are Michael and Alex, a horrifying discovery that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The town that had searched so hard now falls into shock. Candlelight vigils replace search parties. Tears replace hope. And Susan Smith, once seen as a grieving mother, is now branded as a callous and heartless murderer. In 1995, Susan Smith stands trial for the murder of her 2 children. The courtroom is packed, the air heavy with grief and anger. Prosecutors paint a picture of a selfish mother who wanted freedom from responsibility, who was desperate for the affection of her romantic partner, and exclaimed that Susan having children was preventing the 2 from furthering their relationship. While the defense portrays her as a woman overwhelmed by mental illness, past traumas, and despair. Ultimately, the jury spares Susan the death penalty. She is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Susan Smith remains behind bars to this day. Her case is remembered not just for the unbelievably horrific crime she committed, but for the deception, the way she stood before the nation, tears streaming, weaving a lie that captivated millions. Susan Smith's latest parole hearing was held on November 20th, 2024. While behind bars, Susan has been far from a model prisoner. She has an extensive list of violations, including sexual misconduct with officers on 2 separate occasions, drug use, possession of contraband, and self-mutilation, leading her parole to being unanimously denied. She will be eligible for parole again in 2026. To this day, her now ex-husband, David Smith, who was absolutely devastated by this tragedy, says he will do whatever it takes to ensure Susan stays behind bars as long as possible. The tragic disappearance and murder of Michael and Alex Smith is a story that shows the evil and manipulation that can lurk within a community. A woman who fooled her husband, family, and the nation and committed the ultimate act of violence and betrayal against her own children. The quiet waters of John D. Long Lake will forever hold the memory of these two young boys. In 1995, a memorial was constructed in their honor that still stands today. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to comment your thoughts on this heartbreaking case. Do you believe Susan deserves parole, getting another chance in society, or should she remain behind bars for the remainder of her life? And if you're a fan of the morbid and mysterious, be sure to subscribe to Crime Culture, where I will be posting a new haunting true story every week. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on all post notifications. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious.